Class. I'm going to make a quick video for you about identifying funds of knowledge. And I'm going to use Matthew's story. Do you remember when we read the story, Why Do You Force Your Ways by Mr. Frank Finnegar, who is an actual teacher? And he wrote that story about how he was so frustrated with Matthew. And then Matthew's dad, came for parent teacher conference, and Mr. Finnegar was able to make the pivot away from looking at Matthew in a deficit view towards looking at Matthew and all the assets that Matthew brings. So we have been looking at the opportunity gap, and we've been reading about how it's an achievement or opportunity gap. It's not actually an achievement gap. We know that the educational pipeline is still leaking. It's been leaking since its earliest days of the Common School movement, which became US public schools. So it's been leaking in the sense of that we don't serve all learners from all groups equally well. Some students do well in school, and it tends to be based on social differences. Hence, we have a class called School, Society, and Social Differences, because social differences from what? From US society's white mainstream primary English speaking groups that have deviated from that white primary English speaking middle class Protestant Christian, they have usually not fared well in schools. But if you're a teacher like me, I didn't go into teaching because I wanted to teach some students. I'll teach you, but not you. I actually went into teaching because I care about all students learning, and I want every one of my students to excel. So I wanted to be an exemplary teacher. And exemplary teachers are able to start with the learner, not the lesson plan. And that's what Mr. Frank Finnegar learned when he talked with Matthew's father. So, how are we going to do that? As teachers, you are the new generation of teachers addressing the leaking educational pipeline. You don't get a choice of whether you're going to ignore the pipeline or not. You either help to keep the pipeline leaking, or you work against those leaks. Those are your choices. You don't get a choice of ignoring it because it is leaking. If you do nothing, then you're actually contributing to the leaking, because the way schools run right now, and they have run in the past, they don't serve all learners well. So we're looking to find out, how do exemplary teachers teach all students? How are they successful with every learner, even the learners that other teachers continue to fail with? So to do that, we have to be able to do what Dr. Ladson Billings says. We have to be able to foster high levels of academic achievement. We have to foster high levels of cultural competence, and we have to foster high levels of criticality. Okay, that sounds great, but how do we do that? What does that look like? Well, the way that we get started on that is we have to start with the learner. And we have to start with learning how to identify what are the gifts and the experiences and the knowledge and the assets that students bring with them to the classroom. They don't drop off all of their gifts at the entry of the school and leave them out there. They bring them in. But a lot of times teachers don't know how to recognize their students' gifts. And so even I have heard many teachers say something like, my students don't know anything. They just don't know anything. And if you know anything about human biology, anything about about psychology and social psychology, actually, it is not possible for human beings to know nothing. Human beings, we are sponges for learning, and we actually even start absorbing and learning before we're even born. So when we're in our mother's womb, we're already learning. So it's not possible to go to school and know nothing. You know something, but you may not know what your teacher wants you to know. And so the way to start with the learner and not the lesson plan is to start with what the learner knows. And that's what Mr. Frank Finnegar's student Matthew's father was trying to teach Frank that. Frank was a teacher. And so when Matthew's dad said, "Why do you force your ways?" That's where Mr. Frank was saying to Matthew and Matthew's dad, "Well, Matthew doesn't know anything." And Matthew's dad was like, "Yes, he does. He actually knows a lot." And so, but Mr. Frank didn't know how to identify that until he started listening to Matthew's father. And so we're going to practice picking out those funds of knowledge, the gifts that students bring with them to class, because that's part of your job to be an exemplary teacher, to be able to foster high levels of academic achievement, foster high levels of cultural competence, walking in both worlds, high levels of criticality. You have to be able to start with the learner and what they know. How will you help them to walk in both worlds unless you know what they know and what their gifts are? Okay, so we're going to be doing a lot of that, practicing identifying what are the gifts and the funds of knowledge, the community wealth that learners bring to school, so that you don't ever find yourself repeating what you might hear other teachers say. Sometimes teachers' lounges can be very negative places where you hear a lot of deficit talk about learners and their families. And it's easy to kind of fall into the trap of that. So be careful about that. Don't fall into that. And understand that every single learner comes to school with many, many gifts, just as you do. Come to your university classes with many experiences and a wealth of knowledge already, and that's valuable. So, how do we identify that with from the students that come to our classes? I'm going to share my screen with you, and this screen is going to have two handouts on it. This one over here, this, you know, this story, we've already read this story. It's called "Why Do You Force Your Ways?" So this is Matthew's story, and Mr. Frank is the teacher, and he was very frustrated with Matthew. Okay, so and then this second form here, you'll see this a lot. This is your funds of knowledge example category of knowledge. It's the cheat sheet. Just decline that. Sorry about that. Okay. So what this is these are categories of different types of knowledge that learners might bring to your classroom. It's only a beginning list, so don't think that you can't add more to it, okay? So, for example, one category here is agriculture and mining. Examples of that kind of knowledge would be like ranching, farming, horse riding skills, animal management, soil and irrigation systems, crop planting, hunting, tracking, dressing. I see a lot of that kind of knowledge here in Cedar City. I went to the parade at the end of October, and there were sheep coming down Main Street, and there was a ton of this kind of knowledge. So I also see a lot of like knowledge about geology out here, like where people know a lot of different kinds of rocks and the layers of different kinds of rocks and sediment. And so I see a lot of geological knowledge out here in Cedar City. So I could add that. And if I was looking at my own students' knowledge here in Cedar City, I would definitely want to put geological knowledge, because people are very knowledgeable about different kinds of rocks, the histories of the layers of them, that sort of thing. I also noticed that there's a lot of like camping, hiking knowledge. uh, People know a lot about taking, a hydration when you're physical fitness, when you're going to be out in the sun and you're going to be outdoors. I noticed that people know a lot of that kind of stuff here. So my point being that this cheat sheet here is not the only kinds of knowledge that you might find amongst your students. You can be sure to add more categories if you find them. So agriculture and mining, a material and scientific knowledge, construction, carpentry, roofing, masonry, painting, design, architecture. That's a kind of knowledge. Repair knowledge, it takes a lot of specialized knowledge to be able to rebuild a motor of an automobile, work on planes, work on tractors, house maintenance, things like that. I know at my house, my partner, he is an electrical engineer, and when the outlets don't work, he tests them and he can actually fix that. Like, I don't know how to do that, but it is knowledge that we have in our house. So it would definitely be electrical knowledge. And I could either put that in house maintenance or I could make its own category of electrical knowledge. Economics, budgeting, accounting, shopping for Best Buys, business knowledge like market value, appraising, renting, selling, maybe even contracts. Sometimes people move a lot and they know, like what are good contracts if you're renting, what to look out for, those kinds of things. Consumer knowledge, sales, household management, childcare, cooking. I mean, just getting organizing large groups of kids. When my children were little, it was always like we were our own field trip, because we'd have to drop off. Some were playing soccer, some were going to Girl Scouts, some were going here. So I really had to have run a tight ship with a lot of schedule, and we'd have a whiteboard with different chores, who was sweeping the kitchen, who was taking the trash out, so on. So running a household takes a lot of knowledge. Medicine, a lot of people have different kinds of knowledge about cures and aids for illness. I noticed that when I was in South America, like not everybody had access to hospitals and health care, but they did know things that would help if you had an upset stomach. In the South as well, they have a lot of these kind of traditional wisdoms that are passed down over time, like what should you drink or eat to kind of help your stomach a little bit. So they know a lot of things like that. So another category of knowledge would be maybe religious knowledge. They know, they have different stories and fables and ethics and codes of conduct that that helps them. So these are just different categories of knowledge that families might have that come to your classroom, and then for you to be able to foster high levels of academic achievement, foster high levels of cultural competence and foster high levels of criticality, you would draw on and use and bring into your classroom these funds of knowledge, these assets that your students bring with them. Because remember, it's never true that students don't know anything and that they don't bring anything to the classroom. So the thing is, can you see their gifts? You have to see their gifts to be able to utilize them and help to use their gifts to promote high levels of academic achievement and successful teaching and learning. So let's see if we can find some of Matthew's knowledge and fill in the chart here. So you remember reading this story, and at first, Mr. Frank, he just has a lot of deficit talk about Matthew. He says, Matthew's a big worry. Matthew seems very nice outside of class, but his learning skills are very low and his study habits are atrocious, and he has a bad attitude towards school. And bottom line, he was a problem. So that's how Mr. Frank sees him in all these deficit terms. Okay. So he's ready when Matthew's father comes. And so then Matthew's father starts telling him some things, and so he starts talking about some of the things that Matthew knows how to do. Okay. So then out of nowhere, Matthew's dad says, "Can you set a snare?" I know, I personally, I cannot set a snare. Um, and so he says, my expression must have shown a need for repetition. I said, "Can you set a rabbit snare?" Hesitantly, not knowing the reason for this sudden change of topic, I said, no, I can't. Can you set a beaver trap? How about a net under the ice? Can you cook bannock on the rock? No, I can't. But what's that got to do with your son? Well, Matthew can, and I can, and his brother is learning fast too. So, are you already seeing some knowledge that Matthew's bringing to the classroom? Mr. Frank didn't see it, but Matthew's dad is pointing it out. So Matthew knows how to set a rabbit snare. He knows how to set a beaver trap. So we can put that over here. Now, hunting is already under here. I could make it its own category, but I'm going to just go ahead and put it under here. So setting a rabbit snare. So Matthew's knowledge, I'm going to put that up here. This is Matthew's funds of knowledge in community wealth, because it's not just Matthew, but Matthew's dad knows it too, and his brother's learning it too. So this is community wealth, right? So Matthew knows how to set a snare. He knows how to set a beaver trap. Set a beaver trap. Now, I truly do not know how to do that. And he says, set a net under the ice. Set a net under the ice. Okay. And also, now look at this next one. Cook bannock on a rock. Okay, where do we want to put that one? I mean, we could put it right here with the hunting, tracking, dressing skills. So cook fish outdoors on a rock. We could put it there. I mean, I really honestly, you could put that I would even put that in like another category of nutrition, right? Because cooking and preparing different foods, the fish, you got a lot of protein there, right? Okay. And so you also have, I'm going to put like a zoology knowledge here too, because you have to know what a bannock is, right? Different kinds of fish, different kinds of fish. And then up here, like with trapping, preparation of fish, I know that you don't just rinse off the fish and just toss it in a pan. Like I've seen people and they slide the fish open, they fillet it, they take stuff out, the guts out, they sometimes they chop off the head, the tail, things like that. So they actually have to know how to do all that kind of stuff. So that might be part of dressing and preparing the fish. Okay, so it looks like we have zoology knowledge. You could say, um, even look at this with setting a net under the ice. Like you better be careful. You better know something about about physical about physics and weather, because if you go onto the ice and it isn't frozen enough, you could fall through, and then you might need some CPR, and you might need to be rescued, and you might need some survival skills. So I mean, the type of knowledge that is there, it just keeps mushrooming out, right? I can just keep brainstorming all of this just from setting a net under the ice. That I bet he knows how to prepare nets. Would guess that he knows how to fix nets. That's a whole nother kind of knowledge too, right? Um, so there's just tons of knowledge just packed into that one little that one little paragraph right there. So there's even more knowledge that he has in here as well. So what I'm going to want you to do is keep going, go through here. There's a lot more knowledge. These 2 pages are just packed full of funds of knowledge that just Matthew has. And if Matthew has it, and his brother and his dad have it, it's quite possible that other people in the community have it too. So, I mean, it's not a guarantee that everyone has it, but it's likely that a lot of people do know how to do that there. I know if you came to Alabama, not everyone follows or understands college football, but a lot of people do. Pretty much most people do. Not everyone, but a lot of people know something about sports, and they know a lot about weather and fitness, about running outdoors in high humidity and high heat. So not everybody does, but it is something that's pretty common in the community as well. So here I'm guessing, like if I'm teaching and Matthew's in my class and I have other kids that are from that same community, it's possible that other people have that kind of knowledge as well. Just like in Cedar City, maybe not everybody knows about sheep ranching, but some people do. Some people know about cattle ranching as well, raising beef. So we can't say everybody does, but it is something that there is a lot of knowledge about that here in Southern Utah. So um, identifying the knowledge that learners bring to school is a skill that you need to be an exemplary teacher, because the next skill that you're going to learn is, once you have identified this knowledge, how do you bring it into the classroom? And we see a lot of teachers who have the chapters from the McIntyre book. They all have examples of teachers who have taught units using the funds of knowledge that they have identified from their students. Think about even just this with nutrition. Couldn't you, when we think about nutrition food pyramids, couldn't you bring that into the classroom if that's one of your Utah core curriculum standards and you have to talk about, you know, about the food pyramid and how many carbohydrates and how many proteins you need? You could build one that's actually based on what people in your community eat instead of what the category tends to be. They usually will make these posters that reflect more white middle class food standards. And so you could make yours specific to what is from your community. People will resonate with that. Oh, that is what I eat. Some people will look at a food chart like that and it'll say cereal like Wheaties or Cheerios, and they're like, we don't eat that at our house. We eat burritos. So they don't recognize that at all. They know other people eat it, but that's not what they do. And so if you're trying to start with the learner, not the lesson plan, then you're not going to start with like what the mainstream does. You're going to start with what your students do. So you can see this story of Matthew is very powerful, even though it's only 2 pages long, because you see here that at the beginning of the story, Mr. Frank does not know how to start with the student. He starts with the lesson plan. And so then Matthew's father actually helps him to pivot and learn how to start with the student. Start with Matthew. Start your lessons with the funds of knowledge that Matthew brings, and bring that knowledge he has and link it into what they have to learn in school. So, for example, in my classroom, I had third graders in Salt Lake City School District, and we had to learn about harbors. Well, as you know, we don't have any harbors in Utah. So, but my students were very aware that you can take your boat to some of these reservoirs and you can take them down to Nevada. You can take them to Lake Powell. And even though the water levels are dropping, I mean, that's something you can study too, right? But so my students didn't know what a harbor was, but when the test question said, where do you see a boat? And the correct answer was in a harbor. For my students, the correct answer was on the back of a pickup truck being pulled on a trailer. And so I had to teach them to walk in both worlds. Like, yes, you are correct. In Utah, you see a lot of boats on the back of a pickup being pulled by a trailer. But, in some places, like in Massachusetts or in Alabama, in the Mobile Bay, or on Orange Beach, you're going to see boats in like a little harbor, and we can see what a harbor is. We can look at Massachusetts and we can see how that's different than Utah, and how Alabama's coastline is different than Utah being a landlocked place and semi-arid desert. So we can talk all about that and use the students learning and their experience and their wealth of knowledge as a launching point for our curriculum, so that they know what a harbor is, but they also know that there's nothing wrong with their own stories and their own knowledge as well. They can walk in both worlds. They can be from a semi-arid desert and be successful in school and know what a harbor is, even though they don't see harbors all the time, as if we were on the East Coast. Okay, so that's our goal, is to help students to achieve high levels of academic achievement, and they should be able to learn and be successful in both worlds, and be able to understand that just because you don't live by a harbor doesn't mean that where you live isn't as valuable or as important. So that would be the criticality part, is where we're able to say, well, a harbor is important, but in places where we don't have a lot of water, the back of a pickup pulling a boat is just as legitimate too. So that's a very useful knowledge too. You have to be able to pull your boat somewhere. So that's about how to identify funds of knowledge and bring them into the classroom, into your curriculum, so that you're starting with the learner. And to start with the learner, you have to start with their funds of knowledge. Okay. All right. Well, hope that was helpful to you. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and go ahead and push end. Thank you.